Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Allen, and welcome back to What a Book. Today, we continue on in It. He went up to the main desk in the children's library, shaking the train of thought the curfew sign had begun as easily as a dog shakes water after a swim. Hello, Benny, Mrs. Starrett said. Like Mrs. Douglas at school, she genuinely liked Ben. Grown-ups, especially those who sometimes needed to discipline children as part of their jobs, generally liked him because he was polite, soft-spoken, thoughtful, sometimes even funny in a very quiet way. These were all the same reasons most kids thought he was a puke. You tired of summer vacation yet? Ben smiled. This was a standard witticism with Mrs. Starrett. Not yet, he said, since summer vacation's only been going on. He looked at his watch. 1 hour and 17 minutes. Give me another hour. Mrs. Starrett laughed, covering her mouth so it wouldn't be too loud. She asked Ben if he wanted to sign up for the summer reading program, and Ben said he did. She gave him a map of the United States, and Ben thanked her very much. He wandered off into the stacks, pulling a book here and there, looking at it, putting it back. Choosing books was serious business. You had to be careful. If you were a grown-up, you could have as many as you wanted, but kids could only take out 3 at a time. If you picked a dud, you were stuck with it. He finally picked out his 3. Bulldozer, The Black Stallion, and one that was sort of a shot in the dark, a book called Hot Rod by a man named Henry Gregor Felsen. You may not like this one, Mrs. Starrett remarked, stamping the book. It's extremely bloody. I urge it on the teenagers, especially the ones who have just got their driving licenses, because it gives them something to think about. I imagine it slows some of them down for a whole week. Well, I'll give it a whirl, Ben said, and took his books over to one of the tables away from Pooh's corner, where big Billy Goat Gruff was in the process of giving a double dose of Dickens to the troll under the bridge. He worked on Hot Rod for a while, and it was not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. It was about a kid who was a really great driver, but there was this party pooper cop who was always trying to slow him down. Ben found out there were no speed limits in Iowa, where the book was set. That was sort of cool. He looked up after 3 chapters, and his eye was caught by a brand new display. The poster on top, the library was gung-ho for posters, all right, showed a happy mailman delivering a letter to a happy kid. Libraries are for writing, too, the poster said. Why not write a friend today? The smiles are guaranteed. Beneath the poster were slots filled with pre-stamped postcards, pre-stamped envelopes, and stationery with a drawing of the Derry Public Library on top in blue ink. The pre-stamped envelopes were a nickel each, the postcards 3 cents. The paper was 2 sheets for a penny. Ben felt in his pocket. The remaining 4 cents of his bottle money was still there. He marked his place in Hot Rod and went back to the desk. May I have one of those postcards, please? Oh, certainly, Ben. As always, Mrs. Starrett was charmed by his grave politeness and a little saddened by his size. Her mother would have said the boy was digging his grave with a knife and fork. She gave him the card and watched him go back to his seat. It was a table that could seat 6, but Ben was the only one there. She had never seen Ben with any of the other boys. It was too bad, because she believed Ben Henscombe had treasures buried inside. He would yield them up to a kind and patient prospector, if one ever came along. Ben took out his ballpoint pen, clicked the point down, and addressed the card simply enough. Miss Beverly Marsh, Lower Main Street, Derry, Maine, Zone 2. He did not know the exact number of her building, but his mama had told him that most postmen had a pretty good idea of who their customers were once they'd been on their beats a little while. If the postman who had Lower Main Street could deliver this card, that would be great. If not, he would just go to the dead letter office and he would be out 3 cents. It would certainly never come back to him, because he had no intention of putting his name and address on it. Carrying the card with the address turned inward, he was taking no chances, even though he didn't see anyone he recognized. He got a few square slips of paper from the wooden box by the card file. He took these back to his seat and began to scribble, to cross out, and then to scribble again. During the last week of school before exams, they had been reading and writing haiku in English class. Haiku was a Japanese form of poetry, brief, disciplined. A haiku, Mrs. Douglas said, could be just 17 syllables long. No more, no less. It usually concentrated on one clear image which was linked to one specific emotion. Sadness, joy, nostalgia, happiness, love. Ben had been utterly charmed by the concept. He enjoyed his English class, although mild enjoyment was generally as far as it went. He could do the work, but as a rule there was nothing in it which gripped him. Yet there was something in the concept of haiku that fired his imagination. The idea made him feel happy, the way Mrs. Starrett's explanation of the greenhouse effect had made him happy. Haiku was good poetry, Ben felt, because it was structured poetry. There were no secret rules. 17 syllables, one image linked to one emotion, and you were out. Bingo. It was clean. It was utilitarian. It was entirely contained within and dependent upon its own rules. He even liked the word itself, a slide of air broken as if along a dotted line by the K sound at the very back of your mouth. Haiku. Her hair, he thought, and saw her going down the school steps again with it bouncing on her shoulders. The sun did not so much glint on it as seemed to burn within it. Working carefully over a 20-minute period, with one break to go back and get more work slips, striking out words that were too long, changing, deleting, Ben came up with this. Your hair is winter fire. January embers. My heart burns there, too. He wasn't crazy about it, but it was the best he could do. He was afraid that if he frigged around with it too long, worried it too much, he would end up getting the jitters and doing something much worse, or not doing it at all. He didn't want that to happen. The moment she had taken to speak to him he had been a striking moment for Ben. He wanted to mark it in his memory. Probably Beverly had a crush on some bigger boy, a 6th or maybe even a 7th grader, and she would think that maybe that boy had sent the haiku. That would make her happy, and so the day she got it would be marked in her memory. And although she would never know it had been Ben Hanscom who marked it for her, that was all right. He would know. He copied his completed poem onto the back of the postcard, printing in black letters as if copying out a ransom note rather than a love poem, clipped his pen back into his pocket and stuck the card in the back of Hot Rod. He got up then, and said goodbye to Mrs. Starrett on his way out. Goodbye, Ben, Mrs. Starrett said. Enjoy your summer vacation, but don't forget about the curfew. I won't. He strolled through the glassed-in passageway between the two buildings, enjoying the heat there. Greenhouse effect, he thought smugly, followed by the cool of the adult library. An old man was reading the news in one of the ancient, comfortably overstuffed chairs in the reading room alcove. The headline just below the masthead blazed, Dulles pledges U.S. troops to help Lebanon if needed. There was also a photo of Ike shaking hands with an Arab in the Rose Garden. Ben's mama said that when the country elected Hubert Humphrey president in 1960, maybe things would get moving again. Ben was vaguely aware that there was something called a recession going on, and his mama was afraid she might get laid off. A smaller headline on the bottom half of page 1 read, Police hunt for psychopath goes on. Ben pushed open the library's big front door and stepped out. There was a mailbox at the foot of the walk. Ben fished the postcard from the back of the book and mailed it. He felt his heartbeat speed up a little as it slipped out of his fingers. What if she knows it's me somehow? Don't be a stoop, he responded, a little alarmed at how exciting that idea seemed to him. He walked off up Kansas Street, hardly aware of where he was going and not caring at all. A fantasy had begun to form in his mind. In it, Beverly Marsh walked up to him, her gray-green eyes wide, her auburn hair tied back in a ponytail. I want to ask you a question, Ben, this make-believe girl said in his mind, and you've got to swear to tell the truth. She held up the postcard. Did you write this? This was a terrible fantasy. This was a wonderful fantasy. He wanted it to stop. He didn't want it to ever stop. His face was starting to burn again. Ben walked and dreamed and shifted his library books from one arm to the other and began to whistle. You'll probably think I'm horrible, Beverly said, but I think I want to kiss you. Her lips parted slightly. Ben's own lips were suddenly too dry to whistle. I think I want you to, he whispered, and smiled a dopey, dizzy, and absolutely beautiful grin. If he had looked down at the sidewalk just then, he would have seen that 3 other shadows had grown around his own. If he had been listening, he would have heard the sound of Victor's cleats as he, Belch, and Henry closed in. But he neither heard nor saw. Ben was far away, feeling Beverly's lips slip softly against his mouth, raising his timid hands to touch the dim Irish fire of her hair. Like many cities, small and large, Derry had not been planned. Like Topsy, it just growed. City planners never would have located it where it was in the first place. Downtown Derry was in a valley formed by the Kendiskeg Stream, which ran through the business district on a diagonal from southwest to northeast. The rest of the town had swarmed up the sides of the surrounding hills. The valley the township's original settlers came to had been swampy and heavily grown over. The stream and the Penobscot River into which the Kendiskeg emptied were great things for traders, bad ones for those who sowed crops or built their houses too close to them. The Kendiskeg in particular, because it flooded every 3 or 4 years. The city was still prone to flooding in spite of the vast amounts of money spent over the last 50 years to control the problem. If the floods had been caused only by the stream itself, A system of dams might have taken care of things. There were, however, other factors. The Kundiskeg's low banks were one. The entire area's logy drainage was another. Since the turn of the century, there had been many serious floods in Derry, and one disastrous one in 1931. To make matters worse, the hills on which much of Derry was built were honeycombed by small streams. Teralt Stream, in which the body of Cheryl LaMonica had been found, was one of them. During periods of heavy rain, they were all apt to overflow their banks. If it rains 2 weeks, the whole damn town gets a sinus infection, Starting Bill's dad had said once. The Kundiskeg was caged in a concrete canal 2 miles long as it passed through downtown. This canal dived under Main Street at the intersection of Main and Canal, becoming an underground river for half a mile or so before surfacing again at Basie Park. Canal Street, where most of Derry's bars were ranked like felons in a police lineup, paralleled the canal on its way out of town, and every few weeks or so the police would have to fish some drunk's car out of the water, which was polluted to drop dead levels by sewage and mill waste. Fish were caught from time to time in the canal, but they were inedible mutants. On the northeastern side of town, the canal side, the river had been managed to at least some degree. A thriving commerce went on all along it in spite of the occasional flooding. People walked beside the canal, sometimes hand in hand, if the wind was right, that was. If it was wrong, the stench took much of the romance out of such strolling. And at Basie Park, which faced the high school across the canal, there were sometimes Boy Scout campouts and Cub Scout wiener roast. In 1969, the citizens would be shocked and sickened to discover that hippies, one of them had actually sewed an American flag onto the seat of his pants, and that pinko faggot was busted before you could say Gene McCarthy, were smoking dope and trading pills up there. By 69, Basie Park had become a regular open-air pharmacy. You just wait, people said. Somebody'll get killed before they put a stop to it. And of course, someone finally did. A 17-year-old boy had been found dead by the canal, his veins full of almost pure heroin, where the kids called a tight white rail. After that, the druggies began to drift away from Basie Park, and there was even stories that the kid's ghost was haunting the area. The story was stupid, of course, but if it kept the speed freaks and the nodders away, it was at least a useful stupid story. On the southwestern side of town, the river presented even more of a problem. Here, the hills had been deeply cut open by the passing of the Great Glacier and further wounded by the endless water erosion of the Kundiskeg and its webwork of tributaries. The bedrock showed through in many places like the half-unearthed bones of dinosaurs. Veteran employees of the Derry Public Works Department knew that, following the fall's first hard frost, they could count on a good deal of sidewalk repair on the southwestern side of town. The concrete would contract and grow brittle, and then the bedrock would suddenly shatter up through it, as if the earth meant to hatch something. What grew best in the shallow soil which remained was plants with shallow root systems and hardy natures. Weeds and trash plants, in other words. Scruffy trees, thick low bushes, and virulent infestations of poison ivy and poison oak grew everywhere they were allowed a foothold. The southwest was where the land fell away steeply to the area that was known in Derry as the Barrens. The Barrens, which were anything but barren, were a messy tract of land about 1.5 miles wide by 3 miles long. It was bounded by Upper Kansas Street on one side and by Old Cape on the other. Old Cape was a low-income housing development, and the drainage was so bad over there that there were stories of toilets and sewer pipes actually exploding. The Kundiskeg ran through the center of the Barrens. The city had grown up to the northeast and on both sides of it, but the only vestiges of the city down there were Derry Pump House No. 3, the municipal sewage pumping station, and the city dump. Seen from the air, the Barrens looked like a big green dagger pointing at downtown. To Ben, all this geography mated with geology meant was a vague awareness that there was no more houses on his right side now. The land had dropped away. A rickety whitewashed railing, about waist-high, ran beside the sidewalk, a token gesture of protection. He could faintly hear running water. It was the soundtrack to his continuing fantasy. He paused and looked out over the Barrens, still imagining her eyes, the clean smell of her air. From here, the Kundiskeg was only a series of twinkles seen through breaks in the thick foliage. Some kids said that there were mosquitoes as big as sparrows down there at this time of year. Others said there was quicksand as you approached the river. Ben didn't believe it about the mosquitoes, but the idea of quicksand scared him. Slightly to his left, he could see a cloud of circling, diving seagulls. The dump. Their cries reached him faintly. Across the way, he could see Derry Heights and the low roofs of the Old Cape houses closest to the Barrens. To the right of Old Cape, pointing skyward like a squat white finger, was the Derry standpipe. Directly below him, a rusty culvert stuck out of the earth, spilling discolored water down the hill in a glimmering little stream which disappeared into the tangled trees and bushes. Ben's pleasant fantasy of Beverly was suddenly broken by one far more grim. What if a dead hand flopped out of that culvert right now, right this second, while he was looking? And suppose that when he turned to find a phone and call the police, a clown was standing there. A funny clown wearing a baggy suit with big orange puffs for buttons. Suppose a hand fell on Ben's shoulder, and he screamed. There was laughter. He whirled around, shrinking against the white fence separating the safe, sane sidewalk of Kansas Street from the wildly undisciplined barons. The railing creaked audibly, and saw Henry Bowers, Belch Huggins, and Victor Chris standing there. "Hi, tits," Henry said. "What do you want?" Ben asked, trying to sound brave. "I want to beat you up," Henry said. He seemed to contemplate this prospect soberly, even gravely. But oh, his black eyes sparkled. "I gotta teach you something, tits. You won't mind. You like to learn new things, don't you?" He reached for Ben. Ben ducked away. "Hold him, you guys." Belch and Victor seized his arms. Ben squealed. It was a cowardly sound, rabbity and weak, but he couldn't help it. "Please, God, don't let them make me cry and don't let them break my watch," Ben thought wildly. He didn't know if they would get around to breaking his watch or not, but he was pretty sure he would cry. He was pretty sure he would cry plenty before they were through with him. "Tease him. He just sounds like a pig," Victor said. He twisted Ben's wrist. "Don't he sound like a pig?" "He sure do," Belch giggled. Ben lunged first one way and then the other. Belch and Victor went with him easily, letting him lunge, then yanking him back. Henry grabbed the front of Ben's sweatshirt and yanked it upward, exposing his belly. It hung over his belt in a swollen droop. "Look at that gut," Henry cried in amazed disgust. "Jesus pleases." Victor and Belch laughed some more. Ben looked around wildly for help. He could see no one. Behind him, down in the barrens, crickets drowsed and seagulls screamed. "You just better quit," he said. He wasn't blubbering yet, but he was close to it. "You just better." "Or what?" Henry asked, as if he was honestly interested. "Or what, tits? Or what, huh?" Ben suddenly found himself thinking of Broderick Crawford, who played Dan Matthews on Highway Patrol. That bastard was tough. That bastard was mean. That bastard took zero shit from anybody. And then he burst into tears. Dan Matthews would have belted these guys right through the fence, down the embankment and into the pucker brush. He would have done it with his belly. "Oh boy, look at the baby," Victor chortled. Belch joined in. Henry smiled a little, but his face still held that grave, reflective cast, that look that was somehow almost sad. It frightened Ben. It suggested he might be in for more than just a beating. As if to confirm this idea, Henry reached into his jeans pocket and brought out a buck knife. Ben's terror exploded. He had been whipsawing his body futilely to either side. Now he suddenly lunged straight forward. There was an instant where he believed he was going to get away. He was sweating heavily, and the boys holding his arms had greasy grips at best. Belch managed to hold on to his right wrist, but just barely. He pulled entirely free of Victor. Another lunge. Before he could make it, Henry stepped forward and gave him a shove. Ben flew backward. The railing creaked more loudly this time, and he felt it give a little under his weight. Belch and Victor grabbed him again. "Now you hold him," Henry said. "You hear me?" "Sure, Henry," Belch said. He sounded a trifle uneasy. "He ain't gonna get away. Don't worry." Henry stepped forward until his flat stomach almost touched Ben's belly. Ben stared at him, tears spilling helplessly out of his wide eyes. "Caught. I'm caught," a part of his mind yammered. He tried to stop it. He couldn't think at all with that yammering going on, but it wouldn't stop. "Caught, caught, caught." Henry pulled out the blade, which was long and wide and engraved with his name. The tip glittered in the afternoon sunshine. "I'm gonna test you now," Henry said in the same reflective voice. "It's exam time, tits, and you better be ready." Ben wept. His heart thundered madly in his chest. Snot ran out of his nose and collected on his upper lip. His library books lay in a scatter at his feet. Henry stepped on Bulldozer, glanced down, and dealt it into the gutter with a side sweep of one Black's engineer boot. "Here's the first question on your exam, tits. When somebody says, 'Let me copy,' during finals, what are you going to say?" "Yes," Ben exclaimed immediately. "I'm going to say yes, sure, okay. Copy all you want." The buck's tip slid through 2 inches of air and pressed against Ben's stomach. It was as cold as an ice cube tray just out of the frigid air. Ben gasped his belly away from it. For a moment the world went gray. Henry's mouth was moving, but Ben couldn't tell what he was saying. Henry was like a TV with the sound turned off and the world was swimming. swimming. "Don't you dare faint," the panicky voice shrieked. "If you faint, he may get mad enough to kill you." The world came back into some kind of focus. He saw that both Belch and Victor had stopped laughing. They looked nervous, almost scared. Seeing that had the effect of a head-clearing slap on Ben. All of a sudden, they don't know what he's going to do, or how far he might go. However bad you thought things were, that's how bad they really are. Maybe even a little worse. You got to think. If you never did before or never do again, you better think now. Because his eyes say they're right to look nervous. His eyes say he's crazy as a bedbug. "That's the wrong answer, Tits," Henry said. "If just anyone says, 'let me copy,' I don't give a red fuck what you do. Got it?" "Yes," Ben said, his belly hitching with sobs. "Yes, I got it." "Well, okay. That's one wrong. But the biggies are still coming up. You ready for the biggies?" I guess so." A car came slowly toward them. It was a dusty 51 Ford with an old man and woman propped up in the front seat like a pair of neglected department store mannequins. Ben saw the old man's head turn slowly toward him. Henry stepped closer to Ben, hiding the knife. Ben could feel its point dimpling his flesh just above his belly button. It was still cold. He didn't see how that could be, but it was. "Go ahead, yell," Henry said. "You'll be picking your fucking guts off your sneakers." They were close enough to kiss. Ben could smell the sweet smell of juicy fruit gum on Henry's breath. The car passed and continued on down Kansas Street, as slow and serene as the pace car in the Tournament of Roses parade. "All right, Tits. Here's the second question. If I say, 'let me copy' during finals, what are you going to say?" "Yes, I'll say yes, right away." Henry smiled. "That's good. You got that one right, Tits. Now here's the third question. How am I going to be sure you never forget that?" I don't know," Ben whispered. Henry smiled. His face lit up and was for a moment almost handsome. "I know," he said, as if he had discovered a great truth. "I know, Tits. I'll carve my name on your big fat gut." Victor and Belch abruptly began laughing again. For a moment, Ben felt a species of bewildered relief, thinking it had all been nothing but make-believe, a little shuck and jive the three of them had womped up to scare the living hell out of him. But Henry Bowers wasn't laughing, and Ben suddenly understood that Victor and Belch were laughing because they were relieved. It was obvious to both of them that Henry couldn't be serious. Except Henry was. The buck knife slid upward, smooth as butter. Blood welled in a bright red line on Ben's pallid skin. "Hey!" Victor cried. The word came out muffled, in a startled gulp. "Hold him!" Henry snarled. "You just hold him, hear me?" Now there was nothing grave and reflective on Henry's face. Now it was the twisted face of a devil. "Jeezum crow, Henry, don't really cut him!" Belch screamed, and his voice was high, almost a girl's voice. Everything happened fast then, but to Ben Hanscom it all seemed slow. It all seemed to happen in a series of shutter clicks, like action stills in a Life magazine photo essay. His panic was gone. He had discovered something inside him suddenly, and because it had no use for panic, that something just ate the whole panic. In the first shutter click, Henry had snatched his sweatshirt all the way up to his nipples. Blood was pouring from the shallow vertical cut above his belly button. In the second shutter click, Henry drew the knife down again, operating fast, like a lunatic battle surgeon under an aerial bombardment. Fresh blood flowed. Backward, Ben thought coldly as blood flowed down and pooled between the waistband of his jeans and his skin. Gotta go backward. That's the only direction I can get away in. Belch and Victor weren't holding him anymore. In spite of Henry's command, they had drawn away. They had drawn away in horror. But if he ran, Bowers would catch him. In the third shutter click, Henry connected the two vertical slashes with a short horizontal line. Ben could feel blood running into his underpants now, and a sticky snail trail was creeping down his left thigh. Henry leaned back momentarily, frowning with the studied concentration of an artist painting a landscape. After H comes E, Ben thought, and that was all it took to get him moving. He pulled forward a little bit, and Henry shoved him back again. Ben pushed with his legs, adding his own force to Henry's. He hit the whitewashed railing between Kansas Street and the drop into the Barrens. As he did, he raised his right foot and planted it on Henry's belly. This was not a retaliatory act. Ben only wanted to increase his backward force. And yet, when he saw the expression of utter surprise on Henry's face, he was filled with a clear savage joy. a feeling so intense that for a split second he thought the top of his head was going to come off. Then there was a cracking, splintering sound from the railing. Ben saw Victor and Belch catch Henry before he could fall on his ass in the gutter next to the remains of Bulldozer, and then Ben was falling backward into space. He went with a scream, and that was half a laugh. Ben hit the slope on his back and buttocks just below the culvert he had spotted earlier. It was a good thing he landed below it. If he had landed on it, he might well have broken his back. As it was, he landed on a thick cushion of weeds and bracken and barely felt the impact. He did a backward somersault, feet and legs snapping over his head. He landed sitting up and went sliding down the slope backward like a kid on a big green shoot-the-chute, his sweatshirt pulled up around his neck. His hand grabbed for purchase and doing nothing but yanking out tuft after tuft of bracken and witchgrass. He saw the top of the embankment. It seemed impossible that he had just been standing up there, receding with crazy cartoon speed. He saw Victor and Belch, their faces round white O's, staring down at him. He had time to mourn his library books. Then he fetched up against something with agonizing force and nearly bit his tongue in half. It was a downed tree, and it checked Ben's fall by nearly breaking his left leg. He clawed his way back up the slope a little bit, pulling his leg free with a groan. The tree had stopped him about halfway down. Below, the bushes were thicker. Walling falling from the culvert ran over his hands in thin streams. There was a shriek from above him. Ben looked up again and saw Henry Bowers coming flying over the drop, his knife clenched between his teeth. He landed on both feet, body thrown backward at a steep angle so he would not overbalance. He skidded to the end of a gigantic set of footprints and then began to run down the embankment in a series of gangling kangaroo leaps. "I'm going to kill you! It's—" Henry was shrieking around the knife, and Ben did need a UN translator to tell him Henry was saying, "I'm going to kill you, tits! I'm going to fucking kill you!" Now, with that cold general's eye he had discovered up above on the sidewalk, Ben saw what he had to do. He managed to gain his feet just before Henry arrived, the knife now in his hand and held straight out in front of him like a bayonet. Ben was peripherally aware that the left leg of his jeans was shredded, and his leg was bleeding much more heavily than his stomach, but it was supporting him, and that meant it wasn't broken. At least he hoped that's what it meant. Ben crouched slightly to maintain his precarious balance, and as Henry grabbed it in with one hand and swept the knife in a long flat arc with the other, Ben stepped aside. He lost his balance, but as he fell down he stuck out his shredded left leg. Henry's shin struck it, and his legs were booted out from under him with great efficiency. For a moment Ben gaped, his terror overcome with a mixture of awe and admiration. Henry Bowers appeared to be flying exactly like Superman over the fallen tree where Ben had stopped. His arms were straight out in front of him, the way George Reeves held his arms out on the TV show. Only George Reeves always looked like flying was as natural as taking a bath or eating lunch on the back porch. Henry looked like someone had shoved a hot poker up his ass. His mouth was opening and closing. A string of saliva was shooting back from one corner of it, and as Ben watched, it splattered against the lobe of Henry's ear. Then Henry crashed back to earth. The knife flew out of his hand. He rolled over on one shoulder, landed on his back, and slid away into the bushes with his legs splayed into a V. There was a yell, a thud, and then silence. Ben sat, dazed, looking at the matted place in the bushes where Henry had done his disappearing act. Suddenly rocks and pebbles began to bounce by him. He looked up again. Victor and Belch were now descending the embankment. They were moving more carefully than Henry, and hence more slowly, but they would reach him in 30 seconds or less if he didn't do something. He moaned. Would this lunacy never end? Keeping his eyes on them, he clambered over the downed tree and began to scramble down the embankment, panting harshly. He had a stitch in his side. His tongue hurt like hell. The bushes were now almost as tall as Ben himself. The randy green smell of stuff growing out of control filled his nose. He could hear running water somewhere close, chuckling over stones and writhing between them. His feet slipped, and here he went again, rolling and sliding, smashing the back of his hand against a jutting rock, shooting through a patch of thorns that hooked blue-gray puffs of cotton from his sweatshirt and little divots of meat from his hands and cheeks. He slammed to a jarring halt sitting up, with his feet in the water. Here was a little curving stream, which wound its way into a thick stand of second-growth trees to his right. It looked as dark as a cave in there. He looked to his left and saw Henry Bowers lying on his back in the middle of the stream. His half-open eyes showed only whites. Blood trickled from one ear and ran toward Ben in delicate threads. Oh my God, I killed him. Oh my God, I'm a murderer. Oh my God. Forgetting that Belch and Victor were behind him, or perhaps understanding they would lose all interest in beating the shit out of him when they discovered their fearless leader was dead, Ben splashed 20 feet upstream to where Henry lay, his shirt in ribbons, his jeans soaked black, one shoe gone. Ben was vaguely aware that there was precious little left of his own clothes and that his body was one big rattletrap of aches and pains. His left ankle was the worst. It had already puffed tight against his soaking sneaker, and he was favoring it so badly that he was really not walking but lurching like a sailor on shore for the first time after a long sea voyage. He bent over Henry Bowers. Henry's eyes popped wide open. He grabbed Ben's calf with one scraped and bloodied hand. His mouth worked, and although nothing but a series of whistling aspirations emerged, Ben could still make out what he was saying. Kill you, you fat shit. Henry was trying to pull himself up, using Ben's leg as a pole. Ben pulled backward frantically. Henry's hand slipped down, then off. Ben flew backward, whirling his arms, and fell on his ass for a record-breaking third time in the last 4 minutes. He also bit his tongue again. Water splashed up around him. A rainbow glimmered for an instant in front of Ben's eyes. Ben didn't give a fuck about the rainbow. He didn't give a fuck about finding a pot of gold. He would settle for his miserable fat life. Henry rolled over, tried to stand, fell back, managed to get to his hands and knees, and finally tottered to his feet. He stared at Ben with those black eyes. The front of his flat top now leaned this way and that, like corn husk after a high wind had passed through. Ben was suddenly angry. No, this was more than being angry. He was infuriated. He had been walking with his library books under his arms, having an innocent little daydream about kissing Beverly Marsh, bothering nobody. And look at this. Just look. Pants shredded. Left ankle maybe broken, badly sprained for sure. Leg all cut up, tongue all cut up. Henry goddamn Bowers monogram on his stomach. How about all that happy-crappy sports fans? But it was probably the thought of his library books, for which he was liable, that drove him to charge Henry Bowers. His lost library books and his mental image of how reproachful Mrs. Starrett's eyes would become when he told her. Whatever the reason, cuts, sprain, library books, or even the thought of the soggy and probably illegible rank card in his back pocket, it was enough to get him moving. He lumbered forward, squashy head squatting in the shallow water, and kicked Henry squarely in the balls. Henry uttered a horrid, rusty scream that sent birds beating up from the trees. He stood spraddle-legged for a moment, hands clasping his crotch, staring unbelievably at Ben. Ugh, he said in a small voice. Right, Ben said. Ugh, Henry said, in an even smaller voice. Right, Ben said again. Henry sank slowly back to his knees, not so much falling as folding up. He was still looking at Ben with those unbelieving black eyes. Ugh. Damn right, Ben said. Henry fell on his side, still clutching his testicles, and began to roll slowly from side to side. Ugh, Henry moaned. My balls. Ah! Oh, you broke my balls. He was now beginning to gain a little force, and Ben started to back away a step at a time. He was sickened by what he had done, but he was also filled with a kind of righteous, paralyzed fascination. Oh, my fucking sack. Oh, my fucking balls. Ben might have remained in the area for an untold length of time, perhaps even until Henry recovered enough to come after him. But just then a rock struck him above the right ear with such a deep, drilling pain that, until he felt warm blood flowing again, Ben thought he had been stung by a wasp. He turned and saw the other two striding up the middle of the stream toward him. They each had a handful of water-rounded rocks. Victor pegged one, and Ben heard it whistle past his ear. He ducked, and another struck his right knee, making him yell with surprised hurt. A third bounced off his right cheekbone, and that eye filled with water. He scrambled for the far bank and climbed it as fast as he could, grabbing onto protruding roots and hauling on handfuls of bushes. He made it to the top. One final stone struck his buttock as he pulled himself up, and took a quick look back over his shoulder. Welch was kneeling beside Henry while Victor stood half a dozen feet away, firing stones, one the size of a baseball clipped through the man-high bushes beside Ben. He had seen enough. In fact, he had seen more than enough. Worst of all, Henry Bowers was getting up again. Like Ben's own Timex watch, Henry could take a licking and keep on ticking. Ben turned and smashed his way into the bushes, lumbering along in a direction he hoped was west. If he could cross to the old Cape side of the Barrens, he could beg a dime off somebody and take the bus home. And when he got there, he would lock the door behind him and bury these tattered, bloody clothes in the trash, and this crazy dream would finally be over. Ben thought of himself sitting in his chair in the living room, freshly tubbed, wearing his fuzzy red bathrobe, watching Daffy Duck cartoons on the mighty 90, and drinking milk through a strawberry flavor straw. Hold that thought, he told himself grimly, and kept lumbering along. Bushes sprang into his face. Ben pushed them aside. Thorns reached and clawed. He tried to ignore them. He came to a flat area of ground, and that was black and mucky. A thick stand of bamboo-like growth spread across it, and a fetid smell rose from the earth. An ominous thought, quicksand, slipped across the foreground of his mind like a shadow as he looked at the sheen of standing water deeper into the groove of bamboo stuff. He didn't want to go in there. Even if it wasn't quicksand, the mud would suck his sneakers off. He turned right instead, running along the front of the bamboo grove and finally into a patch of real woods. The trees, mostly firs, were thick, growing everywhere, battling each other for a little space and sun, but there was less undergrowth and he could move faster. He was no longer sure what direction he was moving in, but still thought he was, on measure, a little ahead of the game. The barrens were enclosed by dairy on 3 sides and bounded by the half-finished turnpike extension on the 4th. Sooner or later, he would come out somewhere. His stomach throbbed painfully, and he pulled up the remains of his sweatshirt for a look. He winced and drew a whistle of air in over his teeth. His belly looked like a grotesque Christmas tree ball, all caked red blood and smeared green from his slide down the embankment. He pulled the sweatshirt down again. Looking at that mess made him feel like blowing lunch. Now he heard a low humming noise from ahead. It was one steady note just above the low range of his hearing. An adult, intent not only on getting the hell out of there. The mosquitoes had found Ben now, and while nowhere near as big as sparrows, they were pretty big, would have ignored it, or simply not heard it at all. But Ben was a boy, and he was already getting over his fright. He swerved to his left and pushed through some low laurel bushes. Behind them, sticking out of the ground, were the top 3 feet of a cement cylinder about 4 feet wide. It was capped with a vented iron manhole cover. The cover was stamped with the words, Dairy Sewer Department. The sound, this close it was more a drone than a hum, was coming from someplace deep inside. Ben put one eye to a vent hole but could see nothing. He could hear that drone and water running down there someplace, but that was all. He took a breath, got a whiff of a sour smell that was both dank and shitty, and drew back with a wince. It was a sewer, that was all. Or maybe a combined sewer and drainage tunnel. There were plenty of those in flood-conscious Derry. No big deal, but it had given him a funny sort of chill. Part of it was seeing the handiwork of man in all this overgrown jumble of wilderness, but he supposed part of it was the shape of the thing itself, that concrete cylinder jutting out of the ground. Ben had read H.G. Wells' The Time Machine the year before, first the classics comics version and then the whole book. This cylinder with its vented iron cap reminded him of the wells which led down into the country of the slumped and horrible Morlocks. He moved away from it quickly, trying to find west again. He got to a little clearing and turned until a shadow was as directly behind him as he could get it. Then he headed off in a straight line. 5 minutes later he heard more running water ahead, and voices. Kids' voices. He stopped to listen, and that was when he heard snapping branches and other voices behind him. They were perfectly recognizable. They belonged to Victor, Belch, and the one and only Henry Bowers. The nightmare was not over yet, it seemed. Ben looked around for a place to go to Earth. He came out of his hiding place about 2 hours later, dirtier than ever, but a little refreshed. Incredible as it seemed to him, he had dozed off. When he had heard the 3 of them behind him, coming after him still, Ben had come dangerously close to freezing up completely, like an animal caught in the headlamps of an oncoming truck. A paralytic drowsiness began to steal over him. The idea of simply lying down, curling up into a ball like a hedgehog, and letting them do whatever they felt like they had to occurred to him. It was a crazy idea, but it also seemed like a strangely good idea. But instead, Ben began to move toward the sound of the running water and those other kids. He tried to untangle their voices and get the sense of what they were saying, anything to shake off that scary paralysis of the spirit. Some project. They were talking about some project. 1 or 2 of the voices were even a little familiar. There was a splash, followed by a burst of good-natured laughter. The laughter filled Ben with a kind of stupid longing, and made him more aware of his dangerous position than anything else had done. If he was going to be caught, there was no need to let these kids in for a dose of his medicine. Ben turned right again. Like many large people, he was remarkably light-footed. He passed close enough to the boys to see their shadows moving back and forth between him and the bright water, but they neither saw him nor heard him. Gradually, their voices began to fall behind. He came to a narrow path which had been beaten down to the bare earth. Ben considered it for a moment, then shook his head a little. He crossed it and plunged into the undergrowth again. He moved more slowly now, pushing bushes aside rather than stampeding through them. He was still moving roughly parallel to the stream the other kids had been playing beside. Even through the intervening bushes and trees he could see it was much wider than the one into which he and Henry had fallen. Here was another of those concrete cylinders, barely visible amid a snarl of blackberry creepers, humming quietly to itself. Beyond, an embankment dropped off to the stream, and here an old, gnarled elm tree leaned crookedly out over the water. Its roots, half exposed by bank erosion, looked like a snarl of dirty hair. Hoping there wouldn't be bugs or snakes, but too tired and numbly frightened to care, Ben had worked his way between the roots and into a shallow cave beneath. He leaned back. A root jabbed him like an angry finger. He shifted his position a little, and it supported him quite nicely. Here came Henry, Belch, and Victor. He had thought they might be fooled into following the path, but no such luck. They stood close by him for a moment. Any closer and he could have reached out in his hiding place and touched them. Bet them little snotholes back there saw him, Belch said. Well, let's go find out, Henry replied, and they headed back the way they had came. A few moments later, Ben heard him roar. What the fuck you kids doing here? There was some sort of reply, but Ben couldn't tell what it was. The kids were too far away, and this close to the river, it was the Kunskeg, of course, was too loud. But he thought the kids sounded scared. Ben could sympathize. Then Victor Chris bellowed something Ben hadn't understood at all. What a fucking baby dam. Baby dam? Baby dam? Or maybe Victor had said what a damn bunch of babies and Ben had misheard him. Let's break it, Belch proposed. There were yells of protest followed by a scream of pain. Someone began to cry. Yes, Ben could sympathize. They hadn't been able to catch him, or at least not yet, but here was another bunch of little kids for them to take out their mad on. Sure, break it, Henry said. Splashes, yells, big moronic gust of laughter from Belch and Victor, an agonized, infuriated cry from one of the little kids. Don't give me any of your shit, you stuttering little freak, Henry Bowers said. I ain't taking no more shit from nobody today. There was a splintering crack. The sound of running water downstream grew louder and roared briefly before quieting to its former placid chuckle. Ben suddenly understood. Baby dam. Yes, that was what Victor had said. The kids, 2 or 3 of them it had sounded like when he passed by, had been building a dam. Henry and his friends had just kicked it apart. Ben even thought he knew who one of the kids was. The only stuttering little freak he knew from Derry School was Bill Denbrough, who was in the other 5th grade classroom. You didn't have to do that, a thin and fearful voice cried out, and Ben recognized that voice as well, although he could not immediately put a face with it. Why did you do that? Because I felt like it, fucknuts, Henry roared back. There was a meaty thud. It was followed by a scream of pain. The scream was followed by weeping. Shut up, Victor said. Shut up that crying, kid, or I'll pull your ears down and tie 'em under your chin. The crying became a series of choked snuffles. We're going, Henry said. But before we do, I want to know one thing. You seen a fat kid in the last 10 minutes or so? Big fat kid all bloody and cut up? There was a reply too brief to be anything but no. You sure? Belch said. You better be, Mushmouth. I'm sure, Bill Denbrough replied. Let's go, Henry said. He probably waded across back that way. Ta-ta, boys, Victor Chris called. It was a real baby dam, believe me. You're better off without it. Splashing sounds. Belch's voice came again, but farther away now. Ben couldn't make out the words. In fact, he didn't want to make out the words. Closer by, the boy who had been crying now resumed. There were comforting noises from the other boy. Ben had decided that there was just the 2 of them, stuttering Bill and the weeper. He half sat, half lay where he was, listening to the 2 boys by the river and the fading sounds of Henry and his dinosaur friends crashing toward the far side of the barrens. Sunlight flicked at his eyes and made little coins of light on the tangled roots above and around him. It was dirty in here, but it was also cozy. Safe. The sound of running water was soothing. Even the sound of the crying kid was sort of soothing. His aches and pains had faded to a dull throb, and the sound of the dinosaurs had faded out completely. He would wait a while, just to be sure they weren't coming back, and then he would make tracks. Ben could hear the throb of the drainage machinery coming through the earth. He could even feel it, a low, steady vibration that went from the ground to the root he was leaning against and then into his back. He thought of the Morlocks again, of their naked flesh. He imagined it would smell like the dank and shitty air that had come up through the vent holes of that iron cap. He thought of their wells driven deep into the earth, wells with rusty ladders bolted to their sides. He dozed, and at some point his thoughts became a dream. It wasn't Morlocks he dreamed of. He He dreamed of the thing which had happened to him in January, the thing which he hadn't quite been able to tell his mother. It had been the first day of school after the long Christmas break. Mrs. Douglas had asked for a volunteer to stay after and help her count the books that had been turned in just before the vacation. Ben had raised his hand. "Thank you, Ben," Mrs. Douglas had said, favoring him with a smile of such brilliance that it warmed him down to his toes. "Suck-ass," Henry Bowers remarked under his breath. It had been the sort of Maine winter day that is both the best and the worst. Cloudless, eye-wateringly bright, but so cold it was a little frightening. To make the 10-degree temperature worse, there was a strong wind to give the cold a bitter cutting edge. Ben counted books and called out numbers. Mrs. Douglas wrote them down, not bothering to double-check his work even on a random basis, he was proud to note. And then they both carried the books down to the storage room through halls where radiators clinked dreamily. At first the school had been full of sounds: slamming locker doors, the clackety-clack of Mrs. Thomas's typewriter in the office, the slightly off-key choral renditions of the glee club upstairs, the nervous thud-thud-thud of basketballs from the gym, and the scrooch and thud of sneakers as players drove toward the baskets or cut turns on the polished wood floor. Little by little these sounds ceased until, as the last set of books was totted up, one short, but it hardly mattered, Mrs. Douglas sighed. They were all holding together on a wing in a prayer. The only sounds were the radiators, the faint whish-whish of Mrs. Fazio's broom as he pushed colored sawdust up the hall floor, and the howl of the wind outside. Ben looked toward the back room's one narrow window and saw that the light was fading rapidly from the sky. It was 4 o'clock and dusk was at hand. Membranes of dry snow blew around the icy jungle gym and swirled between the teeter-totters, which were frozen solidly to the ground. Only the thaws of April would break those bitter winter welds. He saw no one at all on Jackson Street. He looked a moment longer, expecting a car to roll through the Jackson-Witcham intersection, but none did. Everyone in Derry save himself and Mrs. Douglas might be dead or fled, at least from what he could see from here. He looked toward her and saw, with a touch of real fright, that she was feeling almost exactly the same things he was feeling himself. He could tell by the look in her eyes. They were deep and thoughtful and far off, not the eyes of a schoolteacher in her 40s, but those of a child. Her hands were folded just below her breast, as if in prayer. "I'm scared," Ben thought, "and she's scared too. But what are we really scared of?" He didn't know. Then she looked at him and uttered a short, almost embarrassed laugh. "I've kept you too late," she said. "I'm sorry, Ben." "That's okay." He looked down at his shoes. He loved her a little, not with the frank, unquestioning love he had lavished on Miss Thibodeau, his first-grade teacher. But he did love her. "If I drove, I'd give you a ride," she said. "But I don't. My husband's going to pick me up around 5:15. If you'd cared to wait, we could—" "No, thanks," Ben said. "I ought to get home before then." This was not really the truth, but he felt a queer aversion to the idea of meeting Mrs. Douglas' husband. "Maybe your mother could—" "She doesn't drive either," Ben said. "I'll be all right. It's only a mile home." "A mile's not far when it's nice, but it can be a very long way in this weather. You'll go in somewhere if it gets too cold, won't you, Ben?" "Ah, sure. I'll go into Costello's Market and stand by the stove a little while, or something. Mr. Gedrow doesn't mind. And I got my snow pants. My new Christmas scarf, too." Mrs. Douglas looked a little reassured, and then she glanced toward the window again. "It just looks so cold out there," she said. So inimical." He didn't know the word, but he knew exactly what she meant. Something just happened. What? He had seen her, he realized suddenly, as a person instead of just a teacher. That was what had happened. Suddenly he had seen her face in an entirely different way, and because he did, it became a new face, the face of a tired poet. He could see her going home with her husband, sitting beside him in the car with her hands folded as the heater hissed and he talked about his day. He could see her making them dinner. An odd thought crossed his mind, and a cocktail party question rose to his lips. "Do you have children, Mrs. Douglas?" "I often think at this time of the year that people really weren't meant to live this far north of the equator," she said. "At least not in this latitude." Then she smiled, and some of the strangeness either went out of her face or his eye. He was able to see her, at least partially, as he always had. "But you'll never see her that way again. Not completely," he thought, dismayed. "I'll feel old until spring, and then I'll feel young again. It's that way every year." "Are you sure you'll be all right, Ben?" "I'll be fine." "Yes, I suppose you will. You're a good boy, Ben. He looked back at his toes, blushing, loving her more than ever. In the hallway, Mr. Fazio said, Be careful of the frostbite, boy, without looking up from his wet sawdust. I will. He reached his locker, opened it, and yanked on his snow pants. He had been painfully unhappy that his mother insisted he wear them again this winter on especially cold days, thinking of them as baby clothes, but he was glad to have them this afternoon. He walked slowly toward the door, zipping his coat, yanking the drawstrings of his hood tight, pulling on his mittens. He went out and stood on the snow-packed top step of the front stairs for a moment, listening as the door snickered closed and locked behind him. Dairy School brooded under a bruised skin of sky. The wind blew steadily. The snap hooks on the flagpole ropes rattled a lonesome tattoo against the steel pole itself. That wind cut into the warm and unprepared flesh of Ben's face at once, numbing his cheeks. Be careful of the frostbite, boy. He quickly pulled his scarf up until he looked like a small, pudgy caricature of Red Rider. That darkening sky had a fantastical sort of beauty, but Ben did not pause to admire it. It was too cold for that. He got going. At first, the wind was at his back, and things didn't seem so bad. In fact, it actually seemed to be helping him along. At Canal Street, however, he had to turn right and almost fully into the wind. Now it seemed to be holding him back, as if it had business with him. His scarf helped a little, but not enough. His eyes throbbed, and the moisture in his nose froze to a cracked glaze. His legs were going numb. Several times he stuck his mittened hands into his armpits to warm them up. The wind whooped and screamed, sometimes sounding almost human. Ben felt both frightened and exhilarated. Frightened because he could now understand stories he had read, such as Jack London's To Build a Fire, where people actually froze to death. It would be all too possible to freeze to death on a night like this, a night when the temperature would drop to 15 below. The exhilaration was hard to explain. It was a lonely feeling, a somehow melancholy feeling. He was outside. He passed on the wings of the wind, and none of the people beyond the brightly lighted squares of their windows saw him. They were inside where there was light and warmth. They didn't know he had passed them, only he knew. It was a secret thing. The moving air burned like needles, but it was fresh and clean. White smoke jetted from his nose in neat little streams. And as sundown came, the last of the day, a cold yellowy-orange line on the western horizon. The first stars' cruel diamond chips glimmering in the sky overhead. He came to the canal. He was only 3 blocks from home now, and eager to feel the heat on his face and legs moving the blood again, making it tingle. Still, he paused. The canal was frozen in its concrete sluice like a frozen river of rose milk, its surface humped and cracked and cloudy. It was moveless yet completely alive in this harshly puritanical winter light. It had its own unique and difficult beauty. Ben turned the other way, southwest, toward the barrens. When he looked in this direction, the wind was at his back again. It made his snow pants ripple and flap. The canal ran straight between its concrete walls for perhaps half a mile. Then the concrete was gone, and the river sprawled its way into the barrens. At this time of the year, a skeletal world of icy brambles and jutting naked branches. A figure was standing on the ice down there. Ben stared at it and thought, there may be a man down there, but can he be wearing what it looks like he's wearing? It's impossible, isn't it? The figure was dressed in what appeared to be a white silver clown suit. It rippled around him in the polar wind. There were oversized orange shoes on his feet. They matched the pom-pom buttons which ran down the front of his suit. One hand grasped a bundle of strings which rose to a bright bunch of balloons, and when Ben observed that the balloons were floating in his direction, he felt unreality wash over him more strongly. He closed his eyes, rubbed them, opened them. The balloons still appeared to be floating toward him. He heard Mr. Fazio's voice in his head. Be careful of the frostbite, boy. It had to be a hallucination or a mirage brought on by some weird trick of the weather. There could be a man down there on the ice. He supposed it was even technically possible he could be wearing a clown suit. But the balloons couldn't be floating toward Ben, into the wind. Yet that was just what they appeared to be doing. Ben, the clown on the ice called. Ben thought the voice was only in his mind, although it seemed he heard it with his ears. Want a balloon, Ben? There was something so evil in that voice, so awful, that Ben wanted to run away as fast as he could, but his feet seemed as welded to the sidewalk as the teeter-totters in the schoolyard were welded to the ground. They float, Ben. They all float. Try one and see. The clown began walking along the ice toward the canal bridge where Ben stood. Ben watched him come, not moving. He watched as a bird watches an approaching snake. The balloons should have burst in the intense cold, but they did not. They floated above and ahead of the clown where they should have been streaming out behind him, trying to escape back into the barrens, where, some part of Ben's mind assured him, this creature had come from in the first place. Now Ben noticed something else. Although the last of the daylight had struck a rosy glow across the ice of the canal, the clown cast no shadow. None at all. "You'll like it here, Ben," the clown said. Now it was close enough so Ben could hear the clud-clud sound its funny shoes made as they advanced over the uneven ice. "You'll like it here, I promise. All the boys and girls I meet like it here because it's like Pleasure Island in Pinocchio and Never Never Land in Peter Pan. They never have to grow up, and that's what all the kiddies want. So come on, see the sights, have a balloon, feed the elephants, ride the shoot-the-shoots. Oh, you'll like it, and oh, Ben, how you'll float." And in spite of his fear, Ben found that part of him did want a balloon. Who in all the world owned a balloon which would float into the wind? Who had even heard of such a thing? Yes, he wanted a balloon, and he wanted to see the clown's face, which was bent down toward the ice, as if to keep it out of that killer wind. What might have happened if the 5 o'clock whistle atop the dairy town hall hadn't blown just then, Ben didn't know. Didn't want to know. The important thing was that it did blow, an ice pick of sound drilling into the deep winter cold. The clown looked up, as if startled, and Ben saw its face. "The mummy! Oh my God, it's the mummy!" was the first thought, accompanied by a swoony horror that caused him to clamp his hands down viciously on the bridge's railing to keep from fainting. Of course it hadn't been the mummy. Couldn't have been the mummy. Oh, there were Egyptian mummies, plenty of them, he knew that. But his first thought had been that it was the mummy, the dusty monster played by Boris Karloff in the old movie he had stayed up late to watch just last month on Shock Theater. No, it wasn't that mummy. Couldn't be. Movie monsters weren't real. Everyone knew that, even little kids. But it wasn't makeup the clown was wearing. Nor was the clown simply swaddled in a bunch of bandages. There were bandages, most of them around its neck and wrist, blowing back in the wind, but Ben could see the clown's face clearly. It was deeply lined, the skin a parchment map of wrinkles, tattered cheeks, arid flesh. The skin of its forehead was split but bloodless. Dead lips grinned back from a maw on which teeth leaned like tombstones. Its gums were pitted and black. Ben could see no eyes, but something glittered far back in the charcoal pits of those puckered sockets. Something like the cold jewels in the eyes of Egyptian scarab beetles. And although the wind was the wrong way, it seemed to him that he could smell cinnamon and spice, rotting cerements treated with weird drugs, sand, blood so old it had dried to flakes and grains of rust. "We all float down here," the mummy clown croaked, and Ben realized with fresh horror that somehow it had reached the bridge. It was now just below him, reaching up with a dry and twisted hand from which flaps of skin rustled like pennons, a hand through which bone like yellow ivory showed. One almost fleshless finger caressed the tip of his boot. Ben's paralysis broke. He pounded the rest of the way across the bridge with the 5 o'clock whistle still shrieking in his ears. It only ceased as he reached the far side. It had to be a mirage. Had to be. The clown simply could not have come so far during the whistle's 10 or 15-second blast. But his fear was not a mirage. Neither were the hot tears which spurted from his eyes and froze on his cheeks a second after being shed. He ran, boots thudding on the sidewalk, and behind him he could hear the mummy in the clown suit climbing up from the canal, ancient stony fingernails scraping across iron, old tendons creaking like dry hinges. He could hear the arid whistle of its breath pulling in and pushing out of nostrils as devoid of moisture as the tunnels under the great pyramid. He could smell its shroud of sandy spices, and he knew that in a moment its hands, as fleshless as the geometrical construction he made with his erector set, would descend upon his shoulders. They would turn him around, and he would stare into that wrinkled, smiling face. The dead river of its breath would wash over him. Those black eye sockets with their deep glowing depths would bend over him. The toothless mouth would yawn, and he would have his balloon. Oh yes, all the balloons he wanted. But when he reached the corner of his own street, sobbing and winded, his heart slamming crazed, leaping beats into his ears, when he at last looked over his shoulder, the street was empty. The arched bridge with its low concrete sides and its old-fashioned cobblestone paving was also empty. He could not see the canal itself, but he felt that if he could, he would see nothing there either. No, if the mummy had not been a hallucination or a mirage, if it had been real, it would be waiting under the bridge, like the troll in the story of the 3 billy goats gruff. Under. Hiding under. Ben hurried home, looking back every few steps until the door was safely shut and locked behind him. He explained to his mother, who was so tired from a particularly hard day at the mill that she had not, in truth, much missed him, that he had been helping Mrs. Douglas count books. Then he sat down to a dinner of noodles and Sunday's leftover turkey. He stuffed 3 helpings into himself, and the mummy seemed more distant and dreamlike with each helping. It was not real. Those things were never real, and they came fully to life only between the commercials of the late-night TV movies or during the Saturday matinees, or if you were lucky, you could get 2 monsters for a quarter, and if you had an extra quarter, you could buy all the popcorn you could eat. No, they were not real. TV monsters and movie monsters and comic book monsters were not real. Not until you went to bed and couldn't sleep. Not until the last 4 pieces of candy, wrapped in tissues and kept under your pillow against the evils of the night, were gobbled up. Not until the bed itself turned into a lake of rancid dreams and the wind screamed outside, and you were afraid to look at the window because there might be a face there. An ancient grinning face that had not rotted but simply dried like an old leaf, its eyes, sunken diamonds, pushed deep into dark sockets. Not until you saw one ripped and claw-like hand holding out a bunch of balloons. See the sights. Have a balloon. Feed the elephants. Ride the shoot the shoes. Ben, oh Ben, how you'll float. Ben awoke with a gasp, the dream of the mummy still on him, panicked by the close, vibrating dark all around him. He jerked, and the root stopped supporting him and poked him in the back again, as if in exasperation. He saw light and scrambled for it. He crawled out into afternoon sunlight and the babble of the stream, and everything fell into place again. It was summer, not winter. The mummy had not carried him away to its desert crypt. Ben had simply hidden from the big kids in a sandy hole under a half-uprooted tree. He was in the barrens. Henry and his buddies had gone to town in a small way on a couple of kids playing downstream because they hadn't been able to find Ben and go to town on him in a big way. Ta-ta, boys. It was a real baby dam, believe me. You're better off without it. Ben looked glumly down at his ruined clothes. His mother was going to give him 16 different flavors of holy old hell. He had slept just long enough to stiffen up. He slid down the embankment and then began to walk along the stream, wincing at every step. It was a medley of aches and pains. It felt like Spike Jones was playing a fast tune on broken glass inside most of his muscles. There seemed to be a dried or drying blood on every inch of exposed skin. The dam building kids would be gone anyway, he consoled himself. He wasn't sure how long he'd slept, but even if it had only been half an hour, the encounter with Henry and his friends would have convinced Denbro and his pal that some other place, like Timbuktu maybe, would be better for their health. Ben plugged grimly along, knowing if the big kids came back now he would not stand a chance of outrunning them. He hardly cared. He rounded an elbow bend in the stream and just stood there for a moment looking. The dam builders were still there. One of them was indeed stuttering Bill Denbro. He was kneeling beside the other boy, who was propped against the stream bank in a sitting position. This other kid's head was thrown so far back that his Adam's apple stood out like a triangular plug. There was dried blood around his nose, on his chin, and painted along his neck in a couple of streams. He had something white clasped loosely in one hand. Stuttering Bill looked around sharply and saw Ben standing there. Ben saw with dismay that something was very wrong with the boy propped up on the bank. Denbro was obviously scared to death. He thought miserably, "Won't this day ever end? I wonder if you could help me," Bill Denbro said. His aspirator's empty. I think he might be. His face froze, turned red. He dug at the words, stuttering like a machine gun. Spittle flew from his lips, and it took almost 30 seconds worth of before Ben realized Denbro was trying to say the other kid might be dying. And that's where we're going to leave off for today. Thank you all so much for joining me as we finish up Chapter 4. This is a really expansive book. If you liked it, make sure to check out everything that is backlogged over on YouTube, as well as giving me a follow here on Twitch. That way you can get notified every time I go live. Thank you all so much. I've been Matthew Allen, and I will see all of you next week.